Hey guys, Bloodcat7 here. Okay, it is Wednesday, October 24th, 2018, and I want to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. Thank you very much. And if you're watching the videos, guys, please hit the like button. That's very, very important. We want to get this information into people's hands so they can see it. And the only way to do that is by hitting the like button. Of course, it helps the channel, it helps the videos. So please do that. Okay, so if you've been following along, I've been going through this book by C.W. Ceram, which is such an excellent book for alternative researchers to look through. One day when they retire this book, which is often what libraries do, if nobody takes this book out for a long time, they just throw it in the garbage and make room for new books, which probably won't have the same kind of content that this book has. It'll probably be more mainstream crap that's basically misinformation. So anyway, if you've been following along my videos, we've been going through this book by C.W. Ceram, The First American, and it has some fascinating stuff in the book. And we're up to chapter 16, which is solving the riddle of the mounds. I've already covered a little bit of this stuff here, but before I even get into it, I want to read you a little bit of poetry, as I often do. Ceram has added some poetry into the book here, so we are, educated, refined, intelligent people, and we love poetry, right, guys? I hope you do. Anyway, okay, this is a poem by William Cullen Bryant, 1794 to 1878. Poet, journalist, and reluctant lawyer, he published his first book of verse at the age of 14. Though he sounds extremely puritanical today, he was highly esteemed in his time. The mounds inspired his muse more than once. The following verses are part of the poem The Prairies, published in Poems 1832. As o'er the verdant waste I guide my steed, among the high rank grass that sweeps his sides, the hollow beating of his footsteps seems a sacrilegious sound. I think of those upon whose rest he tramples. Are they here, the dead of other days? And did the dust of these fair solitudes once stir with life and burn with passion? Let the mighty mounds that overlook the rivers or that rise in the dim forest crowded with old oaks answer. A race that long has passed away built them, a disciplined and populous race. Heaped with long toil, the earth while yet the Greek was hewing the Pentacles to forms of symmetry and rearing on its rock the glittering Parthenon. So just a little poetry there. Before I begin reading to you from Ceram's book here, from this chapter 16, Solving the Riddle of the Mounds. So I found some very interesting stuff in here, and I hope you'd be interested in it. We want to further our education, my education, your education, on this lost civilization here in North America that, the academics acknowledge it, at least, as far as the mound builders are concerned. And for some reason, they don't want to acknowledge much of anything here in the Northeast for some reason that I'm very suspicious of. So, how this all relates to my research and everything, when I do come across something, and I have numerous times in this book and elsewhere, I point it out. So anyway, let me read to you from this chapter some interesting stuff. Okay, so Ceram is talking about the Adena. Today, there is scarcely any doubt that Adena came before Hopewell, but we are still far from being able to give a date for the building of every mound, as we can so frequently tell the date to the year in the case of the southwestern Pueblos. What is more, we have many theories, but as yet no certainty about where the round-headed, a term used by physical anthropologists to describe races of people, Adena people came from, and why and where they went to when one day they left the area, above all the Ohio Valley. And the long-headed Hopewell people remain equally enigmatic. The quote-unquote where from and quote-unquote where to are still the subject of much scientific discussion. Nevertheless, from the vast quantities of artifacts found in the mounds, we are able to draw up a fairly accurate picture of both cultures. So they can draw a good picture, but they don't know where they came from. They don't know where they went to. Whereas Adena are round-headed, the Hopewell are long-headed, very interesting morphology with their skeletal structure there, something to make note of. So, again, it's just, more mystery surrounds this stuff than actual facts. Okay, it says here, Ceram goes on, the Adena mounds near Chillicothe are named after the estate of a former governor of Ohio, Thomas Worthington. William C. Mills dug there in 1901, discovering, among other things, the famous Adena pipe, quote-unquote, in the form of a human figure, and gave the culture its name. But as late as 1930, Ceram could give only 2 pages in his great book to this culture, with 5 more brief mentions. So little was known about it as yet. 2 years later, however, Emerson F. Greenman identified 70 Adena mounds, and 13 years later, in 1945, William S. Webb and Charles E. Snow were able to publish the substantial report, The Adena People. Webb, incidentally, headed the archaeological salvage work that had become necessary when the building of big dams threatened to flood the ruins. Webb and Snow identified another 103 Adena structures. By 1957, the number had risen to 222, exclamation point. So, they were doing this stuff. They were doing the archaeological digs and investigating these sites before, these valleys were dammed. And, now we can't look at any of that stuff anymore. No more excavation go on. And no less, it is that way at, near my research site in Connecticut there, because they have the Lake Candlewood Lake over there, which is an artificial lake, which covers the majority of stone walls that were constructed in that area. So this is the case in many, many instances around the whole country, and there's a good reason for that. These big valleys were often places where these cultures, made their homes. They were safe. You're surrounded by mountains. You're in this valley where it's often, there's water there, fertile growing flat land, etc., etc. So, often you'll find that these valleys where all these, sites were found are all, inaccessible now because they're covered with water. They were dammed to use for hydroelectric dams and other reasons or whatever it is. But, it's a shame because now we can't look at that stuff. And who knows what was there? Even though they did this work or whatever, how can we, judge it more carefully because, we have more modern equipment and knowledge to actually evaluate it. Okay, so Ceram goes on here. The Adena people were the first in Eastern America to unite the 3 important elements that make a culture possible: the cultivation of maize, the production of pottery, and organized community work. Very interesting. Did the idea of building mounds come from Mexico? ? Perhaps, but the point cannot be proved. Adena mounds were burial mounds, whereas the Mexican people had built chiefly temple mounds. Obviously, Adena culture had a social hierarchy. One can easily tell the graves of distinguished persons from those of no special rank. The bodies of the latter were usually cremated. Something very curious was discovered on some of the skeletons. We quote Willie, archaeologist. Bodies were placed on their backs in an extended position, apparently when the body was still in the flesh, or at least in an articulated condition. Many bones have been recovered stained with red ochre. Either the skeleton was stripped of flesh before the red pigment was poured over it, or there was a period of exposure to decay after which the ochre was applied to the bones. The latter possibility would mean that some time elapsed between the time the body was placed in a tomb and the tomb was sealed. Interesting. Ceram goes on. All this suggests an extraordinary amount of labor. Another curious factor, this is interesting here, is that these people lived in very small village communities of rarely more than 5 houses. If we accept the estimate that thousands of Indians had to labor for at least 5 years to build some of the larger mounds, the problem of organization is perplexing. How were so many people assembled, and how were they provisioned? Yet they also had time for producing all sorts of artifacts, especially ornaments. Small stone or clay tablets of a size that can be conveniently held in the hand and little more than a half-inch thick, engraved with fantastic patterns, sometimes stylized birds, sometimes pure abstract ornamentation, have prompted a good deal of guesswork on the part of archaeologists. That's very interesting there. As we could see in other archaic cultures from around the world. The only reasonable explanation, it goes on, I guess I didn't continue with that. All right. So, let me see, I'm sorry about that. I don't know if I meant to continue or not. But in any case, this is very important here, and that's why I have it underlined over here. The individuality of this culture seems to have crystallized in Illinois first of all. From there it spread to Ohio and Indiana, to Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Missouri. All this during the first centuries of the Christian era. What particularly distinguishes the Hopewell people is their fondness for ornament. They actually adorn their whole bodies from head to foot. Often they even affix coppered noses to their skeletons. Here is the real interesting, and it relates to my own research, and very, very interesting implication here that relates to it. To obtain rare materials, they set up a procurement network over the whole of the eastern America and westward as far as the Rocky Mountains. So they set up a procurement network for these goods. And this relates to my hypothesis about the stone walls of New England being a distribution network, part of a distribution network. I produced a couple of videos on how I related them to Amazon fulfillment centers, and, right away I was attacked and ridiculed by some trolls, actually from a megalithomania, some British trolls, some punks, started trolling me there. I had to get rid of them. But this is a pretty good affirmation for me for what I'm talking about. And again, if you look at the walls, you can see, here's some LiDAR images here. Here's the LiDAR images. You can see this walled area here, and there's no openings in the wall. Somebody commented the other day, I'm going to get into this a little bit more because, these people like Robert Thorson are producing little monsters is what they're doing. But you can see in a lot of these walled areas, there's no opening, there's no entranceway, there's no exit way. If you're building these for livestock or any other purpose or whatever it is, where the heck is the openings in these walls? Yes, some of them have openings. There's openings here or there or whatever. But again, like Barbara DeLong says in her film, Secrets of the Stones, many of the walled-in areas do not have openings, no entryways, no exitways. Why? And they're only 2 feet tall. I mean, who are you keeping in with a 2-foot wall? I mean, you could climb right over, you could step right over it. So, again, this is just, as I said, to me, this is a very close affirmation for me for what these people were intentions were with the stone walls of New England. Okay, he goes on. To what extent they engaged in trade, quote unquote, we have no way of knowing. They obtained copper from Lake Superior, shells, alligator, and shark teeth from the Gulf of Mexico. From the far west, they imported obsidian, the black volcanic glass from which they made their cult knives. From the Rocky Mountains, they imported the teeth and claws of the dangerous grizzly bears. Other shells came from the Atlantic coast and glittering discs of mica from the Carolinas. Their most prized ornaments were softly gleamed river pearls. These have been found not only at the Sheep Mound, rare though they were, they have been found by the gallon in other graves of notables. Single strings of pearls are today valued at several $1,000s, truly royal ornaments. Sorry about that, guys. I'm at the library today. They're letting me use this room. They don't normally do that. I'm indebted to them for that. Okay, Ceram goes on. This is interesting too, they scarcely used gold and silver. Their metal was copper, which they pounded and hammered into tools, ornaments, and a kind of armor plate. But it must be noted that they were not familiar with the process of smelting and hence of pouring metal. At best, they could temper metal by the process called annealing, quote unquote. Such is the accepted archaeological view. And this is curious here, such is the accepted archaeological view. We know what that is, junk. In total defiance of it, the engineer, Arlington H. Mallory, arrived at the fantastic theory, which he presented in book form in 1951. We may gather its essence from the subtitle of this work, The Story of Iron Age Civilization Prior to Columbus. Very interesting. In the space of 238 pages, Mallory seemingly proved irrefutably, on the basis of innumerable pictures, radiocarbon dates, microscopic and metallurgical analysis, that North America had an Iron Age. At first glance, the wealth of evidence, quote unquote, was so arresting that no less an authority than Matthew W. Sterling, director of the Bureau of American Ethnology at the Smithsonian Institution, contributed a preface to the book. And, basically he wrote in a book, that it was great and all this kind of stuff, but, in private he said it was ridiculous. So, I guess he had to. Okay, let's go on here. Central American influences, this is page 226. Central American influences upon the Adena and Hopewell cultures remain debatable and was certainly limited. In the case of the temple mound builders, they are patent. The function of the mounds is the same and exactly as in Mexico. The mounds are scarcely ever single. They always appear in groups of sometimes as many as 40 mounds, constituting ceremonial centers with large areas for processions or assemblies in the middle. And there is another similarity. They were not conceived from the first by an architect to be of a certain shape and size. Rather, they grew up layer by layer. As many as a dozen such layers have been counted. How long did the building take? Did the builders operate like the Mayas by a 52-year calendar? Did they have a calendar at all? What was the origin of the impulse? Who gave the order to heap up a new layer, to embark on more years of toil? Ramps or stairways led to the top, to the temple. Sometimes the inclines were so steep that, as a traveler in 1790 remarked, cattle could not have been driven up them. Unfortunately, none of these temples has been preserved, for they were made of wood and have long since disappeared. There are indications, however, that the priests kept a sacred flame in the temples to which the people bowed down and where perhaps human sacrifices were offered, as in Mexico. These mounds were seldom used for burials. Normally, burial took place in cemeteries around the ceremonial centers. It was in these that archaeologists have made the finds that prove this people's high degree of craft and artistic talent, in no way inferior to that of the Hopewells. That's the temple mound builders. So you have the mound builders, which is really, the Adena and the Hopewell, and then you have these temple mound builders. The Adena and the Hopewell were the ones who were busy, doing the burial mounds, and you have these temple mound builders who were more or less building, ceremonial areas. So anyway, guys, I just wanted to read to you that stuff about the mounds, solving the riddle of the mounds, which they, at the end of the chapter, Ceram says they really haven't solved much about the riddle of the mounds. Just a little bit, that's about it. And like I said, that one fella who is an engineer that spoke about the metallurgy, there being an Iron Age. Well, my background is in engineering and architecture too, topographical design, landscape architecture, industrial design, city planning. I have a background in that, and that's why I see the stone walls of New England as this, Stone Age Amazon fulfillment center, and that's why I go over it in a couple of my videos from a few weeks back. So anyway, guys, I just wanted to go over chapter 16 and point out the interesting things in there and, how it related to my own research. Again, this is a fantastic resource for, alternative history, unknown civilizations, and Ceram is bringing us this great stuff. This is a great book, and of course, I'm at the library today. Again, I love being at the library. It's my favorite place to be. Okay, guys. Anyway, Budcat7 signing out. I'll see you at the next video. Thanks, guys. Bye.